Welcome to Merchman Seeds Cup of Joe. On this episode, early identification of tar spot in the Corn Belt has garnered a lot of attention. Here's some thoughts on what to do in these uncharted scenarios. Here a continuation of advice as herbicide post applications are being applied all over our sales footprint. And interesting information is shared about Foliar Micronutrients after Joe, Ben, Lynn, and Dylan visited some high yield experts this past week.
Hi, this is Joe Mershman. Welcome to Mershman Seeds Cup of Joe. Today we have Ben, Lynn, and Dylan, and I think Ben's going to lead discussion.
Yep, so right after last week's Cup of Joe episode, we saw on social media that tar spot had been identified in the state of Iowa. And, we're in a little bit of uncharted territory because this is the earliest that tar spot has been identified before. So there's definitely people out there that are scouting for it, and it is definitely out there. So what I wanted to show our viewers and to show everybody that's watching is there is a tar spot map where it basically identifies a county and it gives the date for when that county first saw tar spot. It's on the Crop Protection Network. If you Google Crop Protection Network tar spot map, this page up here will show up. So the first identified county in the state of Iowa and confirmed would have been Tama County on June the 7th. I think last year would have been in the same general area, and they wouldn't have identified it till sometime in the June 20th timeframe, and that's when Dylan identified a field here locally, one of Dad's fields in southeast Iowa. That would have been on like the 28th, I believe. I think we were 4 or 5 days after they were there. So I have firsthand experience, we have firsthand experience walking those fields on how devastating tar spot can be and how we need to control it. So we are in really uncharted waters when we have this disease showing up, 20 plus days in advance of where we were last year.
Are we just better at identifying it, or is it truly showing up 20 days earlier?
So my gut reaction and what I know just a little bit about diseases, the wetness that we have had, when you listen to Darren Mueller talking about your shoes have to be wet so many days in a row for the disease to show up, with the moisture that we have had and the accelerated heat units that we've accumulated from some of those 70-degree days in February all the way through. We've had warm weather, and then things have kind of mild back off, but it's still warm enough for that disease to proliferate. I would say that it is probably an environmental factor why we are seeing it earlier this year.
So Ben, tell us why we should be so concerned about tar spot. Now we've seen it, what was it, going on 3 years ago in Champaign County, where it was devastating 3 years ago. So just talk about why, there's a lot of us are rookies in understanding tar spot and what it can do to the crop. So I know you're very concerned, as well as the rest of us, but walk us through somebody that says, well, I'm not sure what I should do, and I'm not familiar with it. Give us 101.
So 101 would kind of look like, I guess, you have to have the disease triangle for the disease. I mean, you have to start at that point. There were a lot of fields in a lot of areas that we cover that have had tar spot, but the yield or the tar spot has came in late enough that it hasn't necessarily been a gigantic yield limiting factor from what we know. So I would say that you can just count on the majority of the fields have some form of inoculant built up. And then it comes to the other portion of the disease triangle. You have to have the right environment. So we have the pathogen, we have the right environment, and corn is obviously a host, so we automatically have 2 out of 3. We had the right environment with the moisture, with all the rainfall, the excessive rainfall that we have seen, and the heat. And now we have a disease that is present in Tama County that has a 14-day latency period. So what they think they know about this product is that before you ever see a spore on the leaves, and I've heard it described as it looks like fly poop or a tar spot, but the tar spot will not rub off. When you wet your fingers and you go to rub it off, it will not wipe off like some of other inert matter.
So kind of like when you drive through tar with your car, you get the little splattering effect on your.
Correct.
And then it doesn't rub off either. Very easy.
Correct. So the spores that you are looking at currently, if you have it in your field today, they showed up 14 days ago, and if you were to pull a sprayer out and apply a fungicide on that, you will see disease continue to show up for another 14 days because you're not stopping the spores in their tracks. I mean, they've already infected at that point. You're stopping the infection from what happens 14 days after that application has been made. So
you're basically protecting those new leaves that haven't encountered the spore.
Correct.
So it starts at the bottom and just moves up the plant.
Correct. So the hard decision becomes, what do we do with this, and what is an agronomic recommendation for controlling if we do have fields that are in our territory that already have tar spot. I'm of the opinion that we need to be getting it stopped. I don't know. There's others that have talked about, wait till the corn gets a little bit taller. I'm not sure I'm necessarily of that opinion. I don't have any research to back this up. This is just my gut feeling is I would be going in there and protecting the yield potential of what we have, because it's only going to continue to spread. There's rainfall in the forecast for this weekend. There's rainfall in the forecast for next week.
We're in a blast furnace right now to boot. So we're going to have heat and moisture, which is going to continue to allow this disease to proliferate. So, if you have the stands and you have the yield potential, I think I'd be protecting the corn plant. I think the part that makes me a little bit nervous now too is that we are in the corn that's planted early. If you're finding it in it, you are at probably your ear leaf or getting very close to where your ear leaf is going to start making emergence. So, if there's any leaf that we want to protect on that corn crop, it's that ear leaf. So if we're 3 leaves below that, you potentially could be infected and you just don't know it yet. Or if you're maybe a little bit earlier in the cycle, you haven't got to that point, so you can protect that yield and not have any of that negative effect on your sink and source relationship there with that ear leaf.
Right. So the other positive thing when it comes to tar spot is that it is very easily controlled. So you don't have to go out and spend the super expensive money on the fungicide that because just a typical strobe or a triazole or an STHI, a single mode of action product, will control this. So you don't have to spend the big money on the 3 mode of action or the super long residuals. Now, you're kind of playing ball a couple different directions there, but we know that a strobilurin fungicide, which would be the fungicides that we started with, like the headline and some of those, we know that we have control with those, but we don't necessarily have the same amount of residual with those. So it's a matter of, okay, you got to start doing the math and figuring out how much protection you're going to be getting and how many more applications are in the budget to protect the crop that you have.
So basically what's going to happen is it's going to infect the plant, the leaves, and then once the leaves basically turn brown, that's what they do, over time. What happened 3 years ago in Champaign County then is when that ear starts setting kernels and putting weight on it, just rips everything out of the stalk. And I remember that fall, farmers were harvesting soybeans. They dropped their soybean heads, put their corn heads on because a 5-mile-an-hour wind was blowing their corn over because the stalks were completely, sucked dry. And they fought to get their corn out of the field before it went down. So the long-term effect is if you don't manage this disease, if you like to harvest down corn, and if it gets that bad, it'll be a nightmare for harvest.
Yep. And
then not to mention the yield loss. And the yield loss can be what, Ben? In over the last 3 years, what have we seen? Like you said, it came in late, didn't really affect some things in certain years, but if it comes in early, that's when it's going to be detrimental.
I want to say in our case where we had a 90-foot strip through the field that didn't have a 2-pass program.
That was last year.
With early, like that June 28th time frame, I want to say it was every bit of 50, 60 bushel an acre. And that was from a 1-pass to a 2-pass. And I think a lot of these guys are going to be going 2-pass to 3-pass with fungicides that have long residuals. So you got to protect it.
Proactive.
Yep.
Get out there and look at your fields, and keep in mind that once you see it, if it's just on the lower leaves, it's already infected the leaves ahead of it because it's 2 weeks behind.
Right. And one of the things that we had, if you wanted to search, Cup of Joe, Jason Batterson, or Cup of Joe FMC, you'd come up with an episode where they talk about products like Xyway, which are in-furrow products that protect you to flag leaf. I think, and there's other products out there that are fairly systemic. It's not just Xyway, that's just the one that has the biggest market share or the biggest marketing budget behind it right now. So there's products out there that are fairly systemic,
unbelievably systemic, and you can put those in furrow, and I think there's going to be a lot more guys focusing this direction. If I had a crystal ball and seeing these guys that have early infection, I think these guys are the ones that there's going to be more focus on what happens on the planter to prevent what can happen in a wet year.
It makes sense, because then you've got built-in protection to get you later, so you don't have to spray.
Right.
And sometimes spray doesn't work because you can't get an applicator, you can't get the timing right. I mean, there's all these other things that are come into play. So,
right.
So right now, that's the disease in corn that we think you should be looking for.
Right. Typically, and going back to the I would be looking for the fields that had the heaviest infestation of tar spot last year. There are fields out there that just had a couple specks. There are fields out there that had, like 50, 60% of the leaf coverage. Of that, I'd be looking for the ones that had the 50, 60%, and you snuck by and inherited your chinny chin chin and made it through. There are products out there that have ratings on tar spot from a corn standpoint. A lot of our Power Core and the products that are out of that Corteva pipeline seem to have a little bit better resistance to tar spot. Resistance is really the wrong word. Tolerance is the right word. They have more tolerance to it, so that plant can have a certain amount of tar spot disease on the leaves and not defoliate. So it's incredible. You can see like a tar spot leaf that would have like 10 or 15% of that leaf covered with the actual spores, and the leaf will turn brown, almost. It's premature senescence. There's no green left, and there's certain products out there with certain levels of tolerance that will have the same amount of spores but still have a perfectly green leaf, and it's not killing that plant. It's not causing that premature senescence. So definitely going to be a good year, I imagine, for guys to dig through which products have the better tolerances than others.
From a field perspective too, I would go look at your fields that, corn on corn obviously would be number one. Fields that have minimum or no-till situations, and then that or also with this is to look at the neighboring fields. If you don't own the field beside you, go look and see what your neighbor did, because a lot of this it's blowing in off of a minimum till, no-till, someone who just maybe hasn't done any residue management. So with that being the host of that inoculum and then making it so it's really tricky. You could do everything right on your acre, but if your neighbor doesn't do something, it's kind of like weed control. If your neighbor doesn't do it and that bank kind of makes its way over, you want to be real cognitive of what is going on around you to make sure that you're checking those fields first. If you're in an area, like I mentioned, in any places like the Green Bay Bottoms where everything's turned black, you probably have a little bit of a time. But if you're in a minimum till, high corn on corn, just a heavy residue, we look at some of these, the new hybrids that are coming out with the increased lignin content, that it's just really hard to get some of this material to decompose over the winter. I mean, it's taken 18, 24 months for some of the stuff to go away when we're just harboring, that host for a long time. So just be really hyper aware, I guess, of what's going on with the residue management program that you or your neighbor had the year before, and then also as you're looking to this fall, if you're in a corn on corn situation, taking care of residue and whatever matter fits your conservation plan or your operation.
So from a disease standpoint, that's our concern. Let's switch a little bit to soybeans now. And right now farmers are getting ready to spray water hemp. And we just want to remind folks of some of the basics when mixing the Enlist combinations. And you always want two modes of action against that water hemp plant. Obviously Roundup is not an effective mode anymore, so you can't count that even though it's in your tank mix maybe, or considered to be in your tank mix. Let's talk a little bit about that.
We're at that time, especially on the early planted soybeans. And I would say this year is going to be an extremely unique year from the people that I'm talking to, seeing the countryside. What we're going to have is a double post application in our soybeans, because the beans were planted a little bit later. The conditions weren't conducive to chase the sprayer, or sprayer wasn't able to get in ahead of the planter. And you have a 1 day window, you get the planter in, and then you don't worry about the spray. So, there's going to be a lot of an early post application, and then potentially coming in right to the labeled date and doing a second post application. So when we're looking at this, We get calls every year, I don't want to say questioning the efficacy of Enlist, but there's always, well, I had misses. And it's really important to make sure that you're checking out the Enlist website. Great resources on what they have to help guide you through the process of mixing, because it typically seems, in talking with Scott Youngman, most of the issues that they find with Enlist really doesn't come from a product performance standpoint. It's a mixing or a component issue with some antagonism, or someone didn't use AMS correctly. There's something in that mixing process that's causing some issues to not get the full efficacy out of that spray. So the biggest one, like I said, we've got Alex with the sequence procedure up here, but the one that stands out, we got highlighted here on the screen, is when you're mixing with Enlist 1, do not pour the glufosinate ammonia products or the glyphosate potassium into the tank at the same time as Enlist 1. So, when you're in the heat of the battle, I guess, and you're just grabbing jugs and pouring, trying to get two at the same time. Why is that important? Because that's the salt of our PowerMax. So if we're using PowerMax, it's extremely important to follow this procedure to make sure that you're getting that through the system and getting the full efficacious effect of that product. There is some stories that we've heard back when Enlist first came out, when using what I'll call the big three of Enlist, glufosinate, and glyphosate, that if you don't follow the correct order, you can kind of end up with some sludge or some cottage cheese in your booms. So we have the ability to use those products now because of a price standpoint. You want to be very careful in your mixing order. Make sure you're following the label. Make sure you're using approved adjuvants, surfactants. You want to make sure that you jar test, as we were talking before, that if you're mixing other products in, whether that be Foliar, Foliar Nutrition, or so biological products, that they all play nice in that mixture. And then the last point that we just want to probably make here when we're talking about post application is, if you're going out with a mix that heavy, you are going to have a crop response. I mean, that's at the end of the day, we're asking that plant to metabolize 3 different, 4 different, 5 different potential products. And during that, there's what we'll call probably like a latency period where beans are going to kind of look a little bit tough. You might see them maybe severely stop their development as far as above ground or even below ground. And like I said, we always get those called, my beans aren't growing, my beans aren't growing. Well, when did you spray? I just sprayed 2 days ago. We got to get the beans to metabolize them because they're tolerant. But it's still, like getting the flu shot, I guess, for lack of, you might have a reaction to it because your body has to metabolize that and get through that process. So these beans have to metabolize that. They have to kind of get through it. We're going to have weather that's pretty conducive to hopefully metabolize that very, very quickly. But you are going to see a crop response. You're going to see a crop response, especially when you're using a heavy load of material that is going to be expected right now, because we've got 4, 5, 6-inch water hemp that's going on out in fields right now. Yeah. So
2 points I'd like to make is, when you get moisture, that helps flush it out, to go through. I mean, no different than when you get sick. What do they tell you? Drink plenty of fluids, right? Yep. So it's kind of the same thing. The other thing, don't forget, if you're going after volunteer corn, you have to increase that rate. How much, Ben?
50%.
50%, because if you're putting Enlist 1 in, there's an antagonistic effect between those 2 herbicides. So if you just put the standard rate, you're just not going to kill your volunteer corn, and you'll be disappointed and you wasted some money. So yeah, those are all great points that you need. Right now is the time to be thinking about that, because hard to believe we might have sprayed thousands of acres last year. What we sometimes forget, because there's a lot of things to remember.
And the folks that, I guess I'll just leave it on, the folks that are going to be new to the Liberty platform are adding that into the mix. Water, water, water. I mean, we've talked about it, but water is your friend, and it's probably one of the cheaper components of your mix. Is just leave the hydrant on and keep refilling the tank, and use that so that way you can get that coverage on all those growing points.
Yeah, 20 gallon per acre is ideal. Is that it?
And I had a retailer tell me yesterday that he's telling everybody 25. So when they're going out with Roundup and Liberty alone, they're aiding the tank to the Liberty 25 gallon and somewhere in that 36 to 40 ounce range, making sure they have the AMS. I mean, that's key for Liberty, but
the more coverage, the better when we're dealing with, especially mare's tail, I think is what most people are fighting when it comes to the Liberty component when they're really focusing on that one.
And on the Liberty component, heat and humidity are your friend. In other words, hot and humid, that's when it really works fast. And the other thing on Liberty is if you have some really tall water hemp and you knock it down 7 to 10 days, come back and spray it again.
Yep,
because there's kind of what do you want to call it, a doubling effect. You don't wait for it to green back up. If you wait for it to green back up, you're probably not going to be able to kill it.
Yep. It's been several years ago, but one of the smartest weed scientists that I feel is in that we have, and we have a lot of great ones, but Jason Norsworthy said that out of Arkansas, University of Arkansas, said that 22 ounces of Liberty 7 to 10 days apart, sprayed correctly, will kill anything. So.
But yeah, it used to be you waited for it to green back up and then you hit it again. Not with Liberty. Liberty, if you got a lot of growing points, you hit it and then just plan to immediately spray again 7 to 10 days. Yep. And then you will kill that plant, because I don't know how many farmers have come in and said, well, my Liberty didn't work. It knocked it down and it came back to life. Well, you were spraying some really, really tall water hemp and you missed a couple nodes is what you did. You missed a couple nodes, it's going to come right back. So tall water hemp, spray it twice.
And we've got enough GDUs going on here this week that, you're going to have Joe's analogy that if you see it now at 3 inches, by the time you get the sprayer filled up, it's going to be 6 inches to 8 inches by the time you get back out there.
Yeah, water hemp doesn't shut down like corn past 86 degrees.
No, if we could get that bred into corn, if we get that part figured out, there's a lot of stuff that, it'd be really envious if we get soybeans and corn to act a little bit like water hemp.
That's absolutely correct. So Dylan, we did some traveling this week. We got to listen to some really smart people. You have any notes that you'd like to share from that?
Yeah, so it kind of really opened my eyes how it seems like products that get on leaves, how they really move into the plant. So it's always kind of, you read people just say, put boron on, put any of these micronutrients on, and it'll get into the plant.
Foliar,
yes. Yep, foliar. And then traveled on Tuesday to a research facility with some really, really smart people, and it kind of really opened our eyes that it takes more than just putting it on the leaves. Like, it has to be, foliar-wise, it needs to be properly formulated so it actually will move. Once it gets on those leaves, it'll actually move and the plant will intake it. So that was one of the most eye-opening kind of plots we saw.
It's usually a higher cost to do that too. So going the cheap way when it comes to those types of products, sometimes you may not be getting the value that you thought you were. And so, I agree with you, Dylan. That was incredible information to see how much more movement in the plant when they had, devices and equipment that they could measure that movement of the boron and different products that are taking stress away from the plant.
Yeah. And then another key one I would say was like our zinc. We kind of saw that kind of back with my tissue sampling a little bit, but really to see the trial data, then pictures and kind of the breakdown of exactly what that's doing for the plant, it was really, really key to, I think we need to really start focusing on. So.
Yep. The other thing that we learned, like on the earlier planted products, whether you're using like liquid with ammonium thiosulfate ATS, that would be a 120026S, or an AMS, which is a dry product that you'd be top spreading, which would be a 210024S. Both of those have shown huge responses, getting that sulfur into the plant, allowing that soybean to help nodulate and pull nitrogen in through. It's just huge. So it was a really good meeting to talk about your boron a little bit. One of the things that they told me was pretty interesting, or that we learned, was, you can apply a 9% liquid boron product, cheap, $5-6 an acre, and your tissue tests will spike. But just because that boron is in the tissue, it doesn't move throughout the leaf the way some of the more expensive products do, and it doesn't get to where it needs to go. So you may see it on the tissue test, but you may not see it with a yield bump at the end of the fall. And boron is so important when it comes to cell wall strength in between each cell wall. And they talk about sugar bleeding on the inside of plants. When stress comes in, when you get a lot of heat or drought stress, that sugar isn't used in a very efficient form. So when you have the correct boron applied foliarly, and you have the correct cell wall structures, that you're using that sugar in a way more efficient manner, and that sugar is going to turn into yield, whether it be protein in soybeans or starch in corn. I mean, there's so many efficiencies, and there are reasons why people charge more money for certain products than others that you can get on a whole bunch of different shelves. So.
Yeah, and then in the last point I think we learned from that plot was a planting date study on the number of nodes on soybeans. They started, March 29th, I think, and all the way to just a few weeks, 3 weeks ago. And the number of nodes difference and why it's so important to plant soybeans early to get more nodes. You basically got more places to hang pods. And the other thing to remember is if you're replanting now or still planting, knowing how this all works, you've got to increase your population, you got to narrow your rows down, because the rule of thumb is if you can have your rows closed by the longest day of the year, you are maximizing your sunlight reception. So when you're planting late, you're going to not have as many nodes because your plants are going to be shorter, and you've got to narrow it down so that you can maximize your sunlight interception. Would you agree, Ben?
Absolutely.
So increase your populations now, narrow your rows down, and like we said last couple of weeks, planting in narrow rows today is like planting 2 weeks calendar-wise in 30-inch rows as far as yield potential.
Yeah, and we have a whole bunch more notes from these test plots and stuff. We're excited to share with you guys as we move forward. But it was a very enlightening trip for sure.
Yeah, and all these extra things you're doing is basically you're taking away stress from the plant and you're protecting the yield potential. You're not adding yield, you're protecting the yield potential. They always say the highest yield potential is when you take the seed and dump it into the planter. That's when you're at the highest yield potential. It starts going down after that. That's because of the environment. I always tell these guys, they say, growing these crops would be easy if we didn't have to do it outside. It'd be a little bit easier. There's probably problems with growing it inside too. But bottom line is, watch your fields right now, because there's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, and you got to protect that yield potential.
Yep.
Well, without any further ado, we'll get on to the jokes. And this weekend's a special weekend for fathers. It's Father's Day. So I have a few Father's Day jokes, and then just an extra one, okay? All right. Star Wars is very popular, everybody knows who Darth Vader is, right? Okay. How does Darth Vader like his toast cooked on Father's Day? How does Darth Vader like his toast cooked on Father's Day? On the dark side, okay? Okay, what kind of races do insects watch on Father's Day? What kind of races do insects watch on Father's Day? NASCAR, okay. Yep. You've got to explain them, they're not too good, right? All right. What's Dad's favorite Father's Day treat? Popsicles,
Mm-hmm.
okay? And then here's one that I can relate to a little bit. Why did the bald dad use his credit card at the wig shop? To pay. And here's my last one. This one's, if you're going to take your dad out to eat, and this happens, you might be able to pull this one off, okay? I went to a restaurant the other day. I arrived 5 minutes early for my reservation. The owner asked me if I didn't mind waiting. I said, I didn't mind. He was very confused when I put on an apron and started taking orders.
There's a dad joke.
That's a dad joke. Well, thanks for watching today. We sincerely appreciate your business. We can't thank you enough. And we hope that your family is safe and healthy, and have a great Father's Day. Take care.